and welcome to my channel, Crafting with Shuttermonkey. I'm Amanda, also known as Shuttermonkey, and I live in Ayrshire in the west coast of Scotland. Now today I'm videoing a special tutorial to show you how to make some notebook covers. Little quilted notebook covers. So I'm going to talk you through step by step how to make one of these, okay? There's going to come these little notebook covers. I actually bought these locally. Now we're in the middle of a lockdown, so there's limited places you can actually go to buy things. But I found these ones first. I found in Poundland. There's not as many pages in these ones, but they were only £1. Okay, they're A5 sized spiral bound notebooks. You can see the spirals on the side there. Okay. And then when I was in Tesco's getting my shopping, I saw they had these ones. These are slightly thicker, these ones. Ever so slightly. They've got more pages in them. So, and just the same style of thing. So I'm going to talk you through how to make one of these. I'm going to show you stage by stage how to make one. Starting with measuring your book and maybe drawing up a plan if you need that. Now, when I started doing mine's, my plans did slightly change, but if you think a printout would help you so you could have it had a visual layout of exactly what I did, let me know and I can put that together and you could just download it through Payhip. Now I used some scraps to make these, and if you're a quilter like me, you've probably got lots and lots of scraps left over from blankets and other projects, even bags and things like that. So I tend to keep all my scraps from the one range together. And I know it's plastic, but it's easy to see through, and I do recycle and use them again. So these two bags here were roughly the same as that big one, but I've managed to use quite a lot of these scraps here. So I've not got many left now. My bag's decreasing. But this is Enchanted Forest, this range by Lewis and Irene, and I made a couple of bags using this. So these are the leftovers. And initially when I planned it, I wanted stripes, and you'll see that through the tutorial. I've got stripes at the back, but I'll do that little handout for you so you can download it and you know exactly what size to cut if you're going to do stripes. I didn't have long enough bits of fabric to make stripes, so I had to piece them together, so that's why the back is patchwork. And then inside, you've got your little flaps on each side and the inside. And you've also got the little bit of ribbon to help keep your place. This bit here is another little bit of ribbon, and I'll show you where to put that in. But you can put a pen in there, or you could even put a D-ring on there and it puts some stitch markers on. So if you're using this as a knitting journal or a crochet journal, you've got some stitch markers handy whenever you need them. These little books here, these are the first ones that I made, and they are quite snug. They're okay, they don't pop back open or anything, but they are a tight fit. And I did wonder if they would be too tight for some people. That one's the same. This one here is squares that were cut on point. Now I didn't do this, I inherited these squares from a quilting friend. So it was quite nice to be able to use them and make them into something. But this one I was adventurous. I put 2 pieces of ribbon in this one. So if I'm working in 2 pairs of socks, I can mark both spots in my journal. Okay, and as I say, these are quite snug. You can see here they are quite tight. There's not much room left up here. They do fit in and they work great, but I just thought maybe you would want something that was a little looser. So after making those ones, and I did think they were quite snug, but they're not too tight and they work perfectly well as journal covers. I did make a third one, and as you can see, if you open this one up, there's a wee bit more room at the top here. So when I'm working through the tutorial, I will tell you exactly where to mark all your lines and where you're sewing. But if you want a less snug fitting journal, I'll tell you how to adjust to make it less snug. This has just got some patchwork here down the spine, and then it's 2 panels either side to make the grey bits here that you fold over. And I've just put in some pink ribbon, and again this one I put 2 bits of pink ribbon in, but I'll show you where to put everything in the tutorial. This notebook cover has patchwork on the back. This one is patchwork all over. This one just has some patchwork down the spine. And the other option you have, if you don't want to do any patchwork, is you could buy just a piece of fabric that's a border print. I mean, there's loads of lovely border prints out there. So you could buy this. Most of them come, there's a nice big chunk of plain fabric in the middle as well, which you would be able to use as your lining inside. And then some of them are just lovely. Can you tell they're like unicorns? And then the other option you have, if you're a quilter and you've got lots of orphan blocks lying about, you can make one with some orphan blocks. This was some blocks left over from a Thimble Blossoms quilt that I made. But they come in handy too, orphan blocks. Right, anyway, enough chatting and let's get on with this tutorial. I hope you enjoy this. The first thing you have to do is measure around your notebook. I'm going to use a little bit of washi tape just to secure my measuring tape in place. It can be difficult to stretch it right around the book when you've only got two hands. Now make sure when you're wrapping this measuring tape around your notebook that you get it right around that metal spine too. You don't want it slipping in between the bits of the metal spine because it won't give you an accurate measurement. I would recommend that you do this with your notebooks before you make the cover because not all notebooks are exactly the same size. This notebook that I'm using is just under 13 inches wide by 8¼ inches high. I've rounded my measurement up to 13.5 by 8.5 just to give me a little extra leeway when I make my notebook cover. The next thing that I need to do is add borders around the edges. I'm going to add a 3-inch border on each side and a 1-inch border to the top and the bottom. So my new measurement is now 19.5 inches wide by 10.5 inches high. The 3-inch borders that you add onto the side will wrap around and tuck inside your notebook. These come in really handy for keeping other bits of paper tucked inside. Then you know where they are, they're not going to get lost. And the inch that you're adding to the top and the bottom just gets used up as your seam allowance. This bit here is the part of your notebook cover that you will see on the outside of your notebook, and this one shows your seam allowances added on. The next thing you need to do is plan how you want the outside of your notebook cover to look. Now I'm going to add a spine down the centre of mine. It's going to be a 2-inch spine, and I'm going to have a patchwork piece at the front with different fabrics top and bottom, and I'm also going to have a little pocket stitched on, just somewhere that I can tuck pens inside. And on the back I'm just going to have stripes running right along the back. Now if you would like a little handout that you can download, I'll upload that onto PayHip, and you can download that handout from there, and it will tell you all the fabrics that you need and what sizes to cut them to, so it saves you even thinking about it if you just want to make one exactly like this. So I'm going to start with this layout, and I'm going to look out some fabrics and lay them out and see what I can come up with. So here we go. I've rummaged through a bag of my scraps and I found some fabrics that I think will work for my notebook cover. I've got some little owls here, but I also quite like these toadstools too. I might put those in instead of the owls. I'll have this piece of red fabric on my front, and I'm also going to use this little bit of white fabric with the tree and the owl. I'm going to use this as my pocket. So now that I've chosen my fabrics, I'm going to go get these all pressed, and then I'm going to cut them all to size, and I'll come back and show you how that looks. This was my original plan. I was just going to have stripes along the back, but unfortunately I didn't have big enough pieces of fabric to just have strips along the back, so I've had to piece some of them together. But that works out just as well. It's going to be just as nice. I'm now ready to start stitching these strips at the back together to make the back of my notebook cover. And then I will join the front two pieces together. And once I've got the back piece and the front piece stitched together, I will then add them onto the spine. Now, one thing I did want to show you, just in case you don't know this, is how to interlock your seams when you're sewing together your patchwork pieces. You can see in this bit here that I've pressed all my seams towards the right hand side, and on the piece below I've pressed that one seam to the left hand side. And because these seams are going in opposite directions, you will be able to interlock them before sewing them together. Just pop a little pin diagonally through and that's ready to stitch together. And I will use this technique all the way down this side here, just to make sure that this seam here is all lined up perfectly on the back of my notebook cover. I'm going to go and get some sewing done now, but I won't add the pocket on at this stage. I'm going to join these front pieces together, join these back pieces together, and then I'll join the back and the front onto the spine. Now I'm ready to sew these first two pieces together. You can see here I've got my little diagonally positioned pin, just holding those two interlock seams together. And I'm going to start sewing. Just make sure that seam hasn't flipped the wrong way. And as you can see, I've sewn right over the top of my pin. And I'll take this pin out. And you can see those two seams there are lined up beautifully. Once I press that, that's going to look lovely. And I'm going to carry on sewing, and I'm going to sew another two pieces together. This time it's the front two pieces that I'm sewing together. I don't use pins a lot to sew my patchwork together when I'm sewing. If I've got seams that I want to be positioned perfectly, I'll put pins in my seams, but the rest of the time I don't use pins. And here we go. That's the front pieces joined together, and the back pieces are all joined together, and now I'm ready to attach these to the spine. This back piece here is ever so slightly bigger than the spine, but what I'll do is I'll just centre up the spine with that back piece and I'll join that together and I'll trim it later on. I won't trim it just now. I'm going to sew these three bits together to make one big piece of fabric. Then I'm going to look out some wadding scraps and I'm going to get this piece quilted, and I'm just going to quilt the two layers. I'll come back once I've quilted it and I'll show you how it's looking. So this is how my notebook cover is looking so far. I've got all my fabric pieces joined together. I've layered it up, quilted it, and then trimmed it to 19.5 inches wide by 10.5 inches high. Those lines that I have marked have helped me to position my pocket into the centre of the front of my notebook cover. And I'm just going to roughly judge where it should be, and once I'm happy with where it is, I will go and stitch around these three sides here just to secure that pocket into place. I may also stitch a line down the middle so I can put more than one pen in without them all rolling about together. And once I've got my pocket into position, I will go stitch that into place. That's my pocket attached, and once my notebook cover is finished, I'll be able to pop some pens in there. I decided not to do that line down the middle. I decided the outside stitching was enough. So now we're ready to attach the binding onto the sides of your notebook cover. But just before you do that, this is where you would insert that little bit of ribbon to use as a pen holder or to hold your stitch markers. So I'm going to show you now where you would position that and sew it into place. You're going to attach this little bit of ribbon onto the left hand side of your notebook cover. This little bit of ribbon is only about 2 inches long, and any type of ribbon will do. So I'm just going to position that little bit of ribbon about 3.5 inches down from the top, and I'm going to pin it into place. Now just remember, if you don't want to use this as a pen holder, you could use it for stitch markers. Put a little D-ring on there or a little O-ring, and that will keep your stitch markers handy. Before you attach your binding, just secure that little ribbon into place Take it back to your sewing machine and just run a couple of stitches along the edge of the ribbon, quite close to the edge. We want to secure the ribbon into place before you attach your binding. You don't want it to move and fall out. My binding fabric was cut at 2 inches by 10.5 inches, and you'll have 2 of those. Now, to make the binding pieces, I have folded my binding pieces in half lengthways and pressed them, and then I've folded them in towards the centre, pressed again, and then folded it all in half one final time. And do that with both of your binding pieces. I'm going to use these little pieces of binding fabric that I've made to bind the sides of my notebook cover. I'm actually going to use a little bit of glue just to secure these into place, because I want to stitch right through and stitch both sides at the same time. The glue just helps to secure the binding in place while you're sewing. You don't have to use this glue pen. I'm going to attach this binding onto both sides of my notebook cover. I'm going to clip it into place. I know I've glued it, but I'm still going to use clips, clip it into place, and I'm going to stitch as close to the edge as possible on the sewing machine. And I'll come back and show you how that looks. So here we go. I've got the binding stitched into place on both sides of my notebook cover, and now I'm going to mark a centre line right down the middle of my spine. You're going to mark lines 3 inches in from each side. That's for a nice snug fit. If you want a less snug fit, mark them at 2 3/4 inches in. I've also secured my piece of ribbon in place that I'm going to use as a notebook marker. I've just pinned that in place 2 inches from the spine that I've marked. I've secured that in place with a few stitches, just like we did with the other little piece of ribbon. Now, before you move on, you should really fold this ribbon up and secure it into place. You don't want it getting sewn into any of the other seams that you're about to stitch. And now you're going to fold your side pieces in. Just fold them along those lines that you marked, whether it's the 3 inch or the 2 3/4 inch, depending on how snug a fit you want. You fold those in so the right sides are together and pin them into place. And you're going to do that on both sides. So while I'm just folding this over and pinning it, I'm going to talk to you about the lining fabric. Your lining fabric started off at 15 inches wide by 10.5 inches high. I've folded in each side of my piece of lining fabric. I folded them in at 1/2 inch twice and then stitched as close as I could to the edge just to secure those edges in place. Once you stitch those 2 side seams on your lining fabric, your lining piece will now measure 13 inches wide by 10.5 inches high. And then you take your lining fabric, and once you have the lining fabric positioned nicely on top of your notebook cover, you're going to pin it all into place, and you're going to sew along the bottom, an inch up from the bottom, and you're going to sew an inch down from the top. Now that's for the snug fit. If you want a less snug fit, you're going to sew 3/4 inch up from the bottom and 3/4 inch down from the top. That will give you the less snug fit. So here we go. I've now stitched my lining fabric into place, and as you can see, I've changed my lining fabric. I've used the other one in the other notebook cover. So the next thing you have to do is snip all 4 corners. You want to reduce the bulk in the seams when you turn your notebook cover around the right way. Be careful not to cut your stitched lines. And once all 4 corners have been snipped, you're going to put your hand inside and flip your notebook cover around to the right side. Now be careful because there's pins in there. Remember, you've pinned your side seams and you've pinned your ribbon, and you don't want to catch any of those on your fingers or the back of your hand. So I'm just going to take all those pins out, and I'm going to fold my seams. Then I'm going to flip my side seams around to the right side. Remember to poke out those corners. You want nice square corners. And once you've folded out all 4 corners, you're going to take this over to your iron board and give it a press. And once it's pressed, you're going to stitch down that centre spine. Just before we finish up, I'm going to show you a second notebook cover that I'm planning on making. These little squares have all been cut on point at 3.5 inches. So I'm going to try stitching all these together and see if I can make another notebook cover. And here we go. I've stitched together all these little pieces, and I've had to add borders top and bottom before I quilted it. So this line has been stitched down the spine, and I've done that on this one too. And now you're ready to pop your notebook inside. And you just take your notebook and you slide one cover into the side. Told you it was a snug fit, didn't I? And then you take the back cover and you slide that into the other side. The line that you stitch down the centre of your spine, just line that up with the centre of the metal spiral. You've got your book inside and you've got your little piece of ribbon there ready to mark your space, and you've also got your little piece of ribbon on the back that you can use for another pen or else some stitch markers. The only thing left to do is for you to trim your ribbon if you want to and seal that end in too. This second notebook cover here, you can see that I've got two pieces of ribbon in this cover, so I can mark two different pages in this book. So if I'm working in two different sock designs, I can easily find each one. And I've also got the little bit of ribbon in the back where I can hang a ring, a little metal ring to hold my stitch markers, or I can pop a pen in there. And there you go, that's you finished. I hope you've enjoyed making your notebook cover. Thanks for watching.